upside and hold your breath when it turns to the downside. So I wanted to kind of go through the idea of money last week, and again, thank you. I don't want to spend too much time on that today because we want to keep this within an hour. But we went through the concept of what money is, and the bottom line for money is that money is an abstraction. Money is an invention of humankind. The earliest combination of people in a society, whether it was a group of hunter-gatherers or a group of farmers in ancient times, money was a necessary invention in order for people to develop and progress by being able to do the things that were necessary to support a society. And money was the essential means of communication of what somebody's value was in the society, in a group of people. Yeah. So this idea that hunter-gatherers and early farmers didn't have a form of money is probably false, because without a form of money as a medium of exchange, and the term is medium of exchange, there would be no ability for me to grow crops and trade them for, let's say, shoes or a stone tool that I could dig the ground with. So money has been with us since the beginning of time, and it has evolved over time, because in the early days money represented something physical. The physical thing had zero value, or maybe it had some value, but seashells, which were traded early, had no real inherent value, but they were prized for their store of value. You could get some nice seashells polished and put them on a string, and that could serve as your form of store of value, which ultimately could be exchanged for value of something else. And then, of course, we had coins and we had metal. We even had money that was backed by gold for a period in history. Only about 300 or 400 years was money, formally backed by gold, and current, paper currency backed by gold. And then in the current era, starting in 1930s with Franklin Roosevelt in the U.S., talking about the U.S. now, the rest of the world has followed along. But here in the U.S., around 1930, gold, exchanging your dollar bills for gold was made illegal. So we had effectively what we call fiat currency, which is paper money printed by the government, printed, officially on their printing presses. You can't print it yourself, obviously, get in trouble for that. But we had currency that was backed by gold. 1971 comes along, and Richard Nixon, aside from all the other things he did, made a dramatic announcement that very few people understood at the time, where he took the US dollar off the gold standard, which means that in foreign exchange with other countries like France and England and any other country that traded with the US, at the end of the day, when we settled the account, you could no longer redeem your US dollars for gold. We came off the gold standard. So it was purely what we call the full faith and credit of the US. It's a debt instrument. Dollar bills, money, credits in your account, in a digital account, let's say, which is where all money is recorded and transacted. We talked about ledgers last week, the importance of a ledger system to keep a record of who owes who what. Because essentially that's all money is. It's debt. It's debt. It's I owe you something. Here's and when I give you a piece of currency, a piece of paper, or a transaction from my bank account, it is simply settling what I owe you, and now you owe somebody else something. So it's a series. So money is debt. It's kind of a hard thing to wrap your mind around, but if you think of it as all money is a debt instrument, a credit of some kind on a ledger system, it begins to make sense as to how, for example, we fund wars by using debt, which is not necessarily borrowing money, although we do. As a nation, we borrow a lot of money, but more importantly, we print money. And by printing money, it's simply another way on the ledger system of increasing somebody's liability to also increase somebody else's, debit or credit. Okay, so it's all based on credit. So that was a quick summary of last week, what we talked about, and present this. Expand it to the screen. Okay, so summarizing last week, today we want to talk about. I wanted to talk with you about decoding Bitcoin, because the next thing we have to wrap our brains around with money is digital money. Is money physical? And if we start with the basis that all money is an abstraction, yes, there's a physical form of that debt instrument, coins, bills, even the numbers in your bank account is a kind of a physical representation of the debt, but it's still an abstraction. So when we get to digital money, that's another human invention that has risen up over the period of the time where we've had computers and internet networks, etc. So now we're in a point in time where money is moving in a digital format, and this represents a big change. May not be evident to you because, again, most people do their banking online today, or they use a credit card, which is another form of a digital representation of a physical account with money credited and debited in it. We use payment systems. For example, if you want to send money to somebody overseas, you might go to Western Union and use a payment system or PayPal or some other system. So it's digital, but it's a digital transaction. Digital money is something even more complicated or more specific. A digital currency is where the software itself is the thing of value. The code is the thing of value that we create. So we create this sense of, we create new money or a new form of money using a digital system. Now, Bitcoin and other digital currencies, Ethereum or ETH, Solana, some of the other names that you might be familiar with, Cardano. These are yet different things again. The original digital money was Bitcoin. Just to finish off this slide, next week we're going to talk about these other digital currencies, what we call altcoins, CBDCs, which is another way of referring to central bank digital currencies. Central bank digital currencies. We'll talk about property rights and the separation of money and state next week. And then finally, we'll conclude the series with the future of finance, the kind of theme of this set of 4 sessions, which is how does digital money actually fix things that might be broken in the system today? And when we fix things, do we fix the world? Do we make the world a better place, or is it going to be a dystopian, more dystopian than we might want? Okay, so let's talk about Bitcoin, decoding Bitcoin. So again, I'm going to focus on Bitcoin today. I'm not going to talk about the other digital currencies. We refer to Bitcoin as the father of digital currencies because it was created, or excuse me, it was introduced to us on Halloween night or Halloween day in 2008. Yeah? Anybody know what else was happening around that time, 2008? Yeah, we had a huge, we had a systemic failure, not just in the US, but on a global scale. And if any of you lived through that and remember that, most of you lived through it. Question is how much you remember about that. We had a mortgage and a housing crisis that was the trigger for this global systemic failure. And it happened, so it didn't happen just in the US, it happened around the world. Why? Because the US financial, led by the US financial system, but followed by other financial systems, particularly in Europe, et cetera, the financialization of the mortgage market had taken mortgages, which are tradable instruments, because what is a mortgage? What's a mortgage?
It's the money that you got to pay for house.
So it's something you owe to pay for your house. It's a piece of debt. Mortgage paper is a piece of debt. Yeah. So if you have a mortgage contract with Bank A can sell that contract to Bank B because it's a debt instrument and it's just like any other debt instrument, like money. It's tradable. It's tradable. And what we were doing was we were taking mortgages and slicing them up like a sausage into thin slices and combining them so that we could make them attractive to large investors and institutions around the world who wanted to buy something that was so-called grade A, a grade A investment or a triple A investment, right? Credit worthiness, right? We all have a credit score. So we all have to be credit worthy to go borrow money. Well, you know, when you're a big institution and you want to borrow money, you only want to borrow debt that's grade A. In other words, everybody's going to pay their debt. But what they were doing with these mortgages was they were slicing them up. I may be repeating stuff that everybody already knows, but they were slicing them up and recombining them in new instruments that were getting a triple A rating. Truth is, about 10% of those mortgages were not paying off. People were not paying their mortgage. They couldn't afford it. They were buying houses. The housing market was booming. People were buying multiple houses, trying to buy and flip. Yeah, it was an attractive opportunity for a lot of people without good credit rating to get in and try to make money fast by buying houses that were in disrepair, fixing them up, flipping them. And people were buying multiple houses with what we call no doc loans, which means they didn't have to prove that they had any income or any credit at all. Banks were just encouraged to lend mortgages. And then these mortgages were getting all sliced and diced and put into different packages and sold to institutions as AAA rated, because there were mortgages, and everybody pays their mortgage, right? AAA rated. Before you know it, some number of those mortgages were not performing, and there was a run on the bank. People said, uh-oh, we got to get out of this. It's not safe. It's not really AAA. And the result was we had this market crash. So back in 2008, we had a mortgage crash. And, it almost brought down the entire financial system. How did anybody have any idea how we rescued the system? Printed more money. The U.S. Federal Reserve and the government, in crisis mode, came together and said, uh-oh, we're going to lose everything here. We're going to go into a deep hole. So we're going to print more money, and who are we going to give that money to? Who got the money?
Financial institutions.
Financial institutions, banks. The banks that had taken all of this risk, loaded up on all of this bad debt, got bailed out, and the people that were actually holding the mortgages, trying to hold on to their houses or whatever, what happened to them? Did they get bailed out? It's a kind of an old story these days. It's kind of an old story. The banks were what we call too big to fail. Anybody remember that term or know that term? Too big to fail. The banks were declared too big to fail. If they failed, the whole system would have come down. So we bailed out the banks. And the moral hazard that was created from that, what would be the moral hazard? Don't be shy. What's the moral hazard?
Trade in debt.
Say again?
Trade in debt.
I couldn't hear. Trade in
Trade in debt.
trade in debt. Well, so the moral hazard is, if you're too big to fail, you took risks you shouldn't have taken with other people's money, but you're too big to fail, and you get bailed out. What's your next move?
Do it again.
Yeah.
What's the risk? You just made a ton of money and you got bailed out. What's the risk? Do it again and again and again and again, because you've been declared too big to fail. That's moral hazard. That teaches people to do things they shouldn't do. Yeah, we try to prevent doing things with our children that teaches them to ignore the moral hazard. And what we've done is we've taught the big banks, the big financial institutions, the central banks of the world to ignore the hazards of this kind of risky behavior. Yeah. 2008 comes out something, the white paper, right? And comes out called Bitcoin. And you can actually go read the white paper. Has anybody read the white paper? The Bitcoin white paper, 2008? I read it when it came out. I didn't understand it. And it took me a long time to figure out how this digital money would work. But I'm going to go back to what happened here when we created the innovation that Bitcoin came out with. Bitcoin was an iterative step in the history of Bitcoin. We had a whole bunch of predecessor steps. So we had the internet come along in the 1970s, and we had a group of people who were cyber security people primarily, people who were interested in how to make code really secure. So and they took to trying to figure out how you could make money secure on the internet, unhackable money, right? How could we do this? And they began way back in the 1970s. A fellow by the name of David Chaum was one of the leaders in this group. And there was a meeting at his house in California. He was a software engineer, but he was really interested in this question of making something so secure that it couldn't be hacked. And so he and the group of people at his house, over some wine, I'm sure, and cheese, came up with the name cypherpunks. And they began to develop these different attempts to create digital money. And the ones highlighted in yellow were the ones that came closest to doing it, but didn't quite make it. So we had B-Money in the 90s. We had something called DigiCash. B-Money, I think, was David Chaum's project. We had something called BitGold. Again, not Bitcoin, but BitGold. We had Hashcash. And the word hash is important because these cyberpunks were dealing with cryptography, which is based around the cryptography that is used by all of the large security systems in the world, the national security systems like the NSA and the CIA. Cryptography is a way to protect through some digital representation of an unhackable code. And the code that came up with, or the protocol they came up with, called something called SHA-256, SHA-256. Yeah, and the SHA-256 was a breakthrough in cryptography. Cryptography being the science of securing code against hacking. Okay, PayPal came out originally in the late 90s as the internet began to be popular. 95 is when we had the first internet browser, 1995. And so the internet was becoming more and more popular. And something called Amazon was created, and a few other companies online, where people were starting to trade things online, buy and sell things. And they needed a form of cash to do this. Yes, you could load in your credit card, et cetera, but the cyberpunks were interested in how to create cash or create money using the code itself. And so all of these building blocks went into the white paper. Okay, and the white paper took all of these different projects and took the best of the projects and then added something that none of the other projects had as a way to secure and make money secure on the internet, in the sense that there were a whole bunch of problems with money on the internet. Something called, first of all, centralization of money runs the risk of somebody not doing something that they're supposed to do. Runs the risk of somebody stealing your money. Whenever you put all of your money in the bank, there's the risk that the people you trust at the bank, some rogue accountant in the bank, could flip the switch on a couple of accounts, take some money. This has happened. Of course, the banks insure against this, so there's liability. So, they'll try to recover your money if it's stolen. In the old days, before we had electronic bank accounts, you're familiar with the stagecoach taking the gold bullion from one bank to another in the Old West. And where do the robbers go? They go to where the money is, to the bank, and they steal the money, right? So we've had this problem of how to secure money in an account throughout history. And so again, part of the problem here was how to solve for that, how to solve for people, not being able to hack the account. Something else called the problem of coordination. So if you want to take trust out of the equation, you trust your banker, you put your money in the bank, you trust the bank to hold your money and to give you, and when you check your account statement every month, it's supposed to come out right? The money you think you have in the account should match the money that is in the account, right? So you'll check your bank statement or you'll check your credit card statement just to make sure that there's nothing on there that isn't something you expect, yeah? So how do we do that? So you're trusting somebody at the bank, at the Federal Reserve, the national level, your local banker, your children or your parents, if they're using a credit card that you've given them, you're trusting people. And money has always been based, the idea that my money is good money and I give it to you and you accept it, is based on trust. So this huge trust factor is important. And how do we take trust out of the equation? Because when you have to trust somebody, it's a point of failure in the system. Trust. So how do we remove that? That was one of the challenges of the cyberpunks, and they tried to grapple with that. And then Satoshi Nakamoto. I'll ask you a question about Satoshi in a minute. So we have to send some love to the cyberpunks, the people that came up with this system, that contributed to this system, that allowed the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper, to be released in 2008. Yeah, and so we have. So let's send some love to the cyberpunks for having come up with this system. And the most important number in the white paper, in my opinion, is 21 million. What does 21 million represent?
21 million Bitcoin out there.
So it's written into the code, the software code, in the white paper. Satoshi Nakamoto came up with the number 21 million as the absolute number that Bitcoin could be created. Absolute amount of Bitcoin that could be created through a process. Yeah? But currently, today, and we're 15 years into this project, at 19 million Bitcoin that has been mined and put into circulation. Okay? So we're almost there. We're coming up in another 2 months to something called a halving event. So this code that was created, this Bitcoin code that was created, is ingenious in so many ways. It's mind-boggling how creative it is. Things like difficulty adjustments, based on the rate of mining and how difficult it is to mine new Bitcoin. And if it gets too difficult, the system backs off a bit and makes it easier so that Bitcoin gets mined at a regular interval. So I'm going to go into this other innovation, blockchain innovation, that is the first and best use of blockchain as a use case, in my opinion. I've looked at blockchain in other fintech projects, and there's some faults with it. But in this case, it's an elegant construction of a system of money. And 21 million is the absolute number of Bitcoin. And what does that mean? So if we have, what makes gold valuable?
Only so much.
It's scarce.
Yeah.
It's not absolutely scarce because we can still mine more gold, but it's very difficult to get more gold. And so we can't inflate it, unlike seashells or other salt bars or other means of creating money. Gold is scarce. Silver is less scarce. So it doesn't quite have the value that gold does. Copper, nickel, iron, not scarce at all. So scarcity becomes a critical feature of money, scarcity. The problem we have with fiat money and scarcity is there is no scarcity. Under the Keynesian economic system, which is that we solve problems like recessions, depressions by printing more money, and then the Federal Reserve Bank can go through a process of restricting money, which raises interest rates, which makes interest rates go up, which again is a way to try to manage the economy. But it's done by a group of, I don't know, how many regional banks are there? 5, 12, something, 5, 12 regional banks, right? The board of directors of the Federal Reserve, most of them old white men, sitting in a room, making a decision about how much money we should have in the system, right? And they regulate that through a regulation of interest rates and creating more money by issuing more debt. So 21 million is a really critical number because it absolutely caps the amount of Bitcoin that will ever be created in all of history. Now, 21 million doesn't sound like a lot when you talk about 8 billion people. So we also have to understand that Bitcoin, another feature of Bitcoin that's necessary for all money is what we call a unit of account. So we can divide Bitcoin by 100 million units, which we call affectionately Satoshis or sats. So it is divisible, but the ultimate supply is fixed. And in economics, we know supply and demand. When the supply is fixed, then it's just a matter of demand that will set the price or the value. I want to give you a visual demonstration, quick visual demonstration. And I'm going to limit this to I'm going to let this run for 5 minutes because I don't want to, I want to spend more time talking about what this means. But this idea of a blockchain solves a major problem. Blockchain helps us create a decentralized network because using this technology, a block is a set of data. I forget how much a block is. 2 megabits. 2 megabits, I think, is a block of data. So a block of data is created. It's added to a chain, a blockchain. And that blockchain is a history of every transaction. It's a history of every transaction. And that's important because now you know if something doesn't add up, because you've got every transaction like you would in any ledger system that is recorded. And if it can't be changed, now you've got a way of determining if the money supply has either been inflated or deflated, if people have overspent or double spent their money, And blockchain is the way of keeping a record of all of these transactions. And the way the blockchain works is that a blockchain is a block of data is approved or validated through a mining operation. We call it mining, but it's actually a set of computers that are searching for a random number. And when they discover the random number, that block is validated, and then it's put onto the blockchain and then validated again by a consensus agreement among all of the nodes on the network, all the computers that are doing this hashing for this number, this hash rate for this number. These computers agree that that block is valid. It goes on the blockchain. Once it's on the blockchain, every block added after that cannot be changed, or added before that cannot be changed. And every node on the network is constantly checking to see if the code matches the consensus agreement among all of these nodes on the network as to whether or not they match up. If they don't match up, the transaction is rejected, it's invalidated, and so you go back to square one, and you have to validate the next transaction before it goes on the blockchain. I want to kind of show you a little bit about how this works. So bear with me, and I'll run this. All right, so I'm going to stop there because, again, this could go on, but I wanted to give you a sense of how this blockchain works as a way of validating transactions that occur over a period of time, right? And there's this second piece, which again I can encourage you to go to, YouTube, which is where this came from, and look for this explanation of blockchain. And go through it. Understanding how this works can be technically challenging. It can challenge even those of us that have been in the industry for a while, because it is complicated. It is this work of these cypherpunks who, again, were very focused on trying to understand, cybersecurity and the whole science, the data science around this. So this can be complicated, but it is a way for you to understand when we talk about Bitcoin as money or Bitcoin as a store of value, of building your own trust factor of why, the people who say, oh, it's smoke and mirrors. I think it helps if you understand that the science behind this, the technology behind this, is, in addition to being pretty solid, really innovative. It was a real invention, yeah, that gave us this new era since 2008, because Ethereum as a digital token, as a digital money, if you will, and I have questions about whether Ethereum is actually more money than Bitcoin is. This is just a remarkable event in history. First the white paper, and then within a few months, running Bitcoin, Al Finney, who ran Bitcoin, within another few months, the purchase of a pizza or two pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin, yeah, which in today's value, do the math, would be worth something like $230 million for two pizzas back in 2010. Yeah? So this is a remarkable invention and change in technology that we are now having this sort of aha moment, this opportunity to choose if this money is actually a viable substitute for the fiat currency and the fiat system that we all work within today. So again, I don't want to spend more time on this. I'm going to go to the next slide. So the question is, all right, so without going through the private and public key process, how these keys are created, because again, the way So Bitcoin blockchain is a public record. Blockchain is, you can go look at the blockchain. It's on a public site, and anybody can examine, the public transactions. So there's something called a public key, which anybody can have. Doesn't matter. Anybody can. If you're doing a transaction with somebody, you share a public key with that person. You have your private key, and they have their private key, and nobody should know your private key ever. Even your best friend should not have your private key, right? Because that private key unlocks your money by anybody that possesses it. So again, without getting into the details or the difficulties or the challenges of maintaining, safe private keys, let's just assume for a moment that you've got a private key and a public key. The public key is the place in the blockchain where a transaction took place. So if you mine new Bitcoin, or if you buy Bitcoin from somebody else and put it in your account, that gets publicly displayed on this public ledger called a blockchain. So we know how many Bitcoin have been issued. We know what accounts are holding Bitcoin. I often wonder when people say, when legislators who want to regulate this say, oh, it's all used for money laundering and for drug and for human trafficking, for drugs, etc., money laundering. It's all public. And in fact, people that have tried to use Bitcoin in ransomware attacks have found that, okay, it's very easy to see when an event occurs and money goes into a Bitcoin account. It's very easy to see that amount there. We don't know who owns that because it's private. That information is private. But when transactions start occurring, when money starts draining from that account to go somewhere else, all we got to do is kind of follow the money. And we have people very skilled at this, who hunt down these people that do ransomware attacks and ask for Bitcoin as payment. Yeah, we have ways of there was a gas pipeline that was shut down in the U.S. a few years ago. The ransomware attack required Bitcoin payment. The Bitcoin went into an account. FBI could see the account. When money started to drain from that account, people were obviously spending it, buying their Lamborghinis or whatever it is they thought they would benefit from their crime. They were picked up, and the Bitcoin was recovered. Yeah. Now, that's not to say that people don't do transactions in Bitcoin that are illegal, because they probably do. Just as people use cash to buy drugs, or in human trafficking, or in some other money laundering operation, right? So Bitcoin itself is not the problem. It's the problem of people doing bad things with money that is in the system and available to them. Okay, so what happens if you lose your private key? Because remember, your private key is your money. You're the bank. What happens if you lose it?
There's no way.
No way to get it. Okay. There's a famous saying in Bitcoin. Somebody had a boating accident, which means that their keys went to the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, no longer recoverable. What happens to that Bitcoin? Who gets it? Nobody. So, and in the early days of Bitcoin, if 10,000 Bitcoin would buy you 2 pizzas, what happens if you have an account with 500 Bitcoin in it and you lose the keys? It's not worth anything. Okay. Today, there's a story of one guy who threw out his hard drive and his computer in a landfill in the UK, and he had something like 1,000 Bitcoin on that private key. He lost it. So he's paying somebody. He actually went to a hedge fund and said, we got to find that hard drive in the landfill, and I'll split the Bitcoin with you, and 1,000 times whatever, $40,000, whatever it is. Yeah. So he actually raised the money to go dig through the landfill to find his hard drive. Unfortunately, he never did. But what happens to your Bitcoin if you lose your private key? It goes. It's gone. it's not gone. It's still on chain. It's still in that blockchain. It's just that you can't recover it. And a certain amount of Bitcoin has been lost. And so what happens with dying Bitcoin? And I thought that was an interesting question. So just see. This is an early. This goes back. I think the date up there is 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Satoshi. This is Satoshi's words on his on this discussion thread. Okay. And regarding dying Bitcoin, somebody asked the question. I wonder though, is there a point where the difficulty of generating new coin is so high that it would make more sense to try to recover keys? Yeah. And Bitcoin and Satoshi's response to that was, lost coins only make everyone else's coins worth slightly more. Think of it as a donation to everyone. Yeah? You lose your keys, it's a donation to the community. Yeah? Philanthropy at the highest level. Okay. I thought that was always an interesting question. There are so many interesting questions. I want to ask a few. Questions. This person, Satoshi Nakamoto, he disappeared in 2012. Disappeared. Stopped publishing, no longer added to his thread, answers questions, etc. He left the project in the hands of what we call the software developers, the development team. It was developing the code, and he left the scene. He had mined personally, we know, because he created something called the Genesis block. That sounds biblical. There's another connection. The Genesis block, which today, if that amount of money mined, that amount of Bitcoin mined went into that original Genesis block. It has never been accessed from the day it was created, the first block. It was never been accessed. I forget the exact amount, but if Satoshi Nakamoto wanted to cash out, he'd probably be one of the richest people in the world today because of the amount of Bitcoin in that Genesis block. Back in those days, you could create and mine Bitcoin on your personal computer right here. You could be sitting in class mining Bitcoin all day on your personal computer because it didn't require a lot of power. We talk about this Bitcoin and the energy consumption that it uses. How am I doing on time, Mark?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay, so we talk about Bitcoin and the energy that it produces or uses. I can go into that. Maybe we can go into that later at the end of these sessions because it is a concern to some people. There's a response to it based in fact that people should consider before making a decision about whether Bitcoin is boiling the oceans. Bitcoin mining is boiling the oceans, right? But I want to go back to this question. I want to end this session today with a question to you. Who do you think Satoshi Nakamoto is or was? Is he dead? Is he alive? Is it a he? Is it a she? Is it a group of people? Who would do this? And remember the timing. We've just had a global financial crisis that almost crashed the world, came this close to crashing the world. Who is this creator? Now we see that there was a lot of other development that went on before this, but it was brought all together elegantly, beautifully in this white paper. Who would do this? Opinions, please. I have no idea. So tell me who you think Satoshi Nakamoto is.
I think it's a collection of individuals in different IT, cybersecurity, computer science related fields that came together after the market crash and decided that they just wanted to innovate on the work that had come before to create a currency system that was, I guess, a good way to look at it is publicly owned as opposed to necessarily.
And nobody's talking? Imagine this room. I'm going to swear you all. I'm going to swear you all to secrecy. Now I'm going to tell you something about my relationship with my wife, and you're all sworn to secrecy. Nobody's going to say a word about this ever to anybody, on pain of death. Should I share it with you?
Yes.
Oh, give me a break. I'm not going there. I'm not going there. How difficult would it be to get a group of people? Now, remember, there's money sitting in an account that could be accessed by this group of people. That could make them the richest people in the world. How objective is that idea? Yeah,
Well, everybody always has someone they can tell.
really?
That one person they can tell.
Really?
I think so.
Because
They trust them.
right, okay. My private keys, where did I put them? Okay, anybody else have an idea of why and who and what this is?
I think I may not be right, but I think this is a system that was created by the government. It's not an individual. It's the government is a people real, but considering the timing of all this,
There's a lot of rumors that this was created by the government. Yeah? Do you trust your government?
well, the question was the government, but yes,
How much do you trust your government?
no, of course not, absolutely.
And which person in the government is in charge?
That's
Whoever did this was just wanted humans to survive a little bit.
Whoever
longer,
did this just wanted humans to survive.
a little bit longer.
Okay. Now we're getting biblical again.
No, it's just
Now we're getting, there's got some religious connotations to all of this, mystical connotations to all of this. Money from heaven or something.
because if you look at this Satoshi name, this is a Japanese person name.
Okay, Satoshi Nakamoto, clearly Japanese name, right?
I mean,
People have been searching for Satoshi Nakamoto. Interestingly enough, got one of the first person to run Bitcoin was a man named Hal Finney who was a programmer in Silicon Valley. And I know I might be running over a couple of minutes right now, so I'll let everybody go who needs to go.
If you have to leave, go ahead. We're right at 2 o'clock.
But for me, this is one of the most interesting questions that I need to grapple with before I can decide if this is the money that's going to save the world. Who did this and why? So I ask you to think about that, and I'll see you in 2 weeks, I hope. I hope to come back in 2 weeks, and maybe somebody has an answer for me, because I need to know who Satoshi Nakamoto is before I bet my entire cross-generational wealth to his care.
You said they disappeared in 2012.
Went offline, so again, they created a system where there was no email trail. So there's no IP address to go look at. There's no server to look at. This is all done through encrypted messaging on message boards, right? There's no way of knowing where this person is located, who this person was, or people, or why they did it. Now, I like this idea. It sits with me that somebody in some agency, like super secret, cryptographic agency, dealing with cryptography, might have come up with this and released it. Or it might have been created by a group of people and accidentally released. Kind of like a virus that got out of the lab. Yeah? But the timing is interesting to me. The intervening time and the developments that have gone on top of this basic invention are interesting to me. I find the whole question of who is Satoshi Nakamoto and why, what was the motivation for doing this, extremely compelling. It's kind of kept me up at night. Yeah?
I think we also need to read the white paper.
That white paper makes interesting reading, particularly now, as time has passed. And it's published. It's on. You can look up white paper on Google, and the Satoshi white paper, and you can read it. The first couple of pages are easily readable. It's written like a scholar would write. It's not written like some cyberpunk in a dark basement, you know, in the middle of the night. It's written as if it's cited as if it was a scholarly paper. Interesting. So I leave you with that thought and appreciate your attention and time today.
All right. Oh, look forward to seeing you, certainly for part 3 of this one, but at any of the other sessions that you plan to attend. Remember, they're every Monday and Wednesday. So please join us and take some pizza for the road.